From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. We begin in Argentina, where due to a number of serious incidents in Buenos Aires, the Copa Libertadores final second leg has been postponed for Sunday. Fans of River Plate were seen attacking the bus carrying the Boca Juniors team as it was approaching to the Estadio Monumental. Police fired tear gas to disperse the crowds, and some of it reportedly drifted inside the bus. Players were seen vomiting and trying to clear their eyes. Other players received injuries and cuts as fans threw bottles and other objects to the bus. Boca Juniors captain Pablo Perez suffered an internal cut to his left eye and he was taken to the hospital. The South American Football Confederation released a statement saying that from the medical point of view, there is no cause for the suspension of the game. Security operations have all but failed, leaving many concerns over Argentina's ability to host the upcoming G20 Summit. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Sabrina Broad, has more on this breaking news.
Strong criticism from all around the country towards the security operation, which was headed by Buenos Aires City Police and the Minister of Security. They had known of this match for over a month now, and of course President Macri had also wanted to see this final match with visitors and fans as well. But they couldn't even guarantee the security with local fans. So many criticisms just days before the G20 summit takes place. Many are searching for an explanation to try to understand what was the failure of this security operation. The bus carrying one of the teams was on its way to River Plate Stadium, and some blocks before arriving, fans began throwing stones. And police, feeling overwhelmed, began to disperse tear gas that affected also the Boca Juniors team.
Moving on, November 25th is the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women. In Latin America, some are marking the day with marches against femicide and violence and in support of women's rights. Thousands have gathered to participate in the march taking place in Quito, which will also see special groups dedicated to different aspects of violence against women, such as for victims of domestic violence, for the rights of transgender women, and other members of the LGBTQ communities. More than 200 doctors who work at the More Doctors for Brazil program were received by Raúl Castro, the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba. President Miguel Díaz-Canel received the first group of over 200 Cuban doctors on Friday. The doctors, who serve more than 100 million people in Brazil's remote and underserved areas, were recalled due to the offensive remarks made by President-elect Jair Bolsonaro. Since 2013, near 20,000 Cuban doctors have served in more than 3,600 Brazilian municipalities.
It's a happy day for us, but I feel sad for the Brazilian people, because we know that they will need us. We know they're not going to have medical attention anymore. At the same time, I'm really happy to be back at home.
More on the doctor's departure from Brazil in this report.
400 doctors flew back to Brasília's international airport. They were among 8,000 doctors who were part of the More Doctors program in Brazil.
I worked in the state of Paraná. Next month, I would have worked there for 2 years. My job was very hard because I was helping a community in poverty. They really needed a doctor to help the people there.
4 Cuban doctors were working in the municipality of Caetes, a very humble and modest municipality, but with a big heart. We can only thank the people of Brazil that welcomed us here.
In order to reduce the impact of the doctors' withdrawal from over 1,000 municipalities, 200 will leave on a daily basis as opposed to a mass exodus.
When things started to get heated, I tried to alert everyone. I also tried to move up the home visits.
Unfortunately, these patients will now lack medical care, the type of care that allows a doctor to pay a home visit when they can't go to a hospital.
The safe return of all doctors by January next year is a priority for Cuba's health ministry.
Hundreds of Central American migrants have moved part of their camp to the borderline between Mexico and the United States. precarious conditions in the improved shelters is what moved a group of families to set up mattresses on the street next to the Chaparral border crossing. As winter approaches, the temperatures become more extreme, with strong heat during the day and temperatures under zero at night. Members of this group have fallen ill to influenza infections and tuberculosis. The mayor of Tijuana, Juan Manuel Gastelum, has declared a humanitarian crisis in the state due to the lack of support from the federal government. Gastelum said he's not going to use funds from the public budget to meet the needs of migrants. He said that he has reached out to the UN for support for the caravan, but facing zero-tolerance policies from the US. Some migrants have started the process of applying for a work permit in Mexico.
Will not compromise the public service of the city. I will not spend the money of the Tijuana residents. I will not put Tijuana in debt.
Authorities in the United States arrested Juan Antonio Hernandez on Friday. He's the brother of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez. He was arrested on charges related to drug trafficking. A statement by the government of Honduras confirmed Juan Antonio Hernandez's arrest in the city of Miami. The statement highlights the government's stance that every person is responsible for their own actions and that responsibility is not transferable to others. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays. Only on Telesur. With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. The 8th Latin American and Caribbean Conference of Social Sciences is being held in Argentina. Speakers from all around the world are discussing the most important issues affecting Latin America. More in this report.
One of the issues up for discussion at the forum is the role of corporate media in the region's politics and how to tackle the rise of conservatism.
¿Cuál es el nuevo rostro de la manipulación?
What is the new face of manipulation? Manipulation has existed for a very long time. But what are the strategies used to fool citizens today? What are the images, the messages? The way stories are constructed to fool people. We have thought long and hard about this, and it's one of our main battles and one of our hardest obstacles to overcome for the region's upcoming elections.
The aim of the debate is to collectively challenge the current media landscape, the lack of regulation within it, and more importantly, the narrative being reported.
We are living in an era of direct attacks fueled by the rise of fascism. This forum is paramount for critical thinking, to reflect and listen to different opinions, to analyze what's happening in our continent from the people perspective. We need to find what possible answers there are to build a more just and equal continent.
Stakeholders across society, including journalists and teachers, discussed at length of how to respond to fake news and the ongoing attacks against popular leaders.
This is a time when the U.S. is losing power, despite its continued aggression. Our region is where they want to consolidate power so they can maintain their hegemony. Therefore, discussions like this are fundamental.
Those of us on the left have a duty to convince those who are not yet convinced that change needs to happen. That is our task ahead.
Attacks against journalists and critics of the right wing are on the rise. They are sometimes fired, smeared, or even killed. This has made the need for regional dialogue an absolute must, so together they can counter mainstream stories that serve the interests of corporations.
Also in Argentina, social leader Rodolfo Orellana was assassinated in Buenos Aires on Friday. According to the country's security minister, he was shot in the back. 36-year-old Orellana was killed by security forces during a peaceful demonstration. The prosecutor confirmed the findings of a preliminary autopsy showing the entry of projectile from a firearm into the scapula, which exited in the facial area. The Central Workers' Organization published a document rejecting the police force's actions. Brazil's Amazon reached the highest levels of deforestation in a decade in the year 2018. Until July of this year, 7,900 square kilometers of Amazon forest were cut down. This number represents an increase of more than 13% from 2017. According to the Minister of Environment, illegal logging is the main factor for increase in deforestation. Greenpeace has attributed the phenomenon to government policies which reduce the number of protected areas. On Friday, Brazilian authorities announced that they have identified some of the individuals involved in the murder of councilwoman and human rights activist Marielle Franco. The state's public security department has confirmed that paramilitary militia groups were involved in the murder of Franco, a fierce advocate for the rights of the country's marginalized groups. She was shot down along her driver on the 14th of March. In Colombia, thousands of students from the departments of Santander and Antioquia have joined the public higher education strike. The students are on their way to Bogota to join the November 28th national strike. The group is protesting the education policies of President Iván Duque. Some students have reported repression by the country's security forces. Colombia's public university students have not managed to come to an agreement with the government. More in this report.
Moments of panic in Popoyan as ESMAD, Colombia's riot police, acted against students who've been on indefinite strike for 45 days. They're striking in defense of the education budget and are also rejecting the repression and abuses by security forces.
We students are not vandals or criminals, but we are also showing the country that in spite of all the pessimism, apathy, indifference to social processes and the fight for education, young people from all regions are empowered and willing to fight in defense of higher education.
Students have carried out 3 national mobilizations and have reached 45 days of strike. They say that the state of negotiations with the government is negative.
The proposals that have been presented are completely absurd. For example, the issue of a voluntary donation by Colombians for higher education. We believe that it is Colombian taxes which have to pay for the crisis in Colombia education. Quality education must be available for the public for free.
Some students have walked as much as 548 kilometers from their territory, while others are walking along the country's highways to join the great national takeover on November 28th, which will bring together social and popular sectors.
And people have also been affected by Ivan Duque's government, not only because of the education policies, but also with the tax code reforms he's trying to make, as well as with the land reform issue, the neglect of our countryside.
Esmad's attacks contrasted with the National Concert for Education, an event in support of the indefinite strike of the 600,000 students from the 32 public universities. They continue to demand that the government allocate the budget to guarantee the right to education.
Human rights organizations from various regions of Colombia have called on the national government to honor the peace agreement. During the 12th National Human Rights Forum, around 400 social leaders expressed their concerns and demanded that the government find a political solution to what they call an armed social conflict, which continues to harm the Colombian people. They have also criticized the imprisonment of more than 400 former FARC members. Also in Colombia, 3 members of an indigenous family were shot and killed by 4 men who entered the Tapasco family housing in the municipality of Rio Sucio. The victims were 63-year-old community leader Serafín Díaz Tapasco, as well as his wife and son. His son was a community educational coordinator. Victims of state and paramilitary violence on Colombia are overwhelmingly indigenous, Afro-Colombian, and campesino leaders. And on to some more colorful news. The Colombian town of San Carlos held its first international graffiti festival to overcome the region's violent past. San Carlos is located over 100 kilometers east of Medellin, in a strategic region where paramilitary and guerrilla groups fought for territory control. But with the help of Colombian and international artists, the town is now hoping to paint over its conflict-ridden past and become a tourist hub. During the festival, artists decorated the streets with 56 new murals.
This mural has the ability to join together a tragic, painful past, a place where paramilitary commanders ordered executions and coordinated the war, which is a magical place, full of hope, full of life.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur. Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The so-called Yellow Vest protests against higher fuel taxes continue across France. Thousands of people in high visibility yellow vests took to the streets in Paris. Police deployed tear gas and water cannon against them, and dozens have been arrested. Protests started a week ago when hundreds of thousands of people blocked roads across the country over French President Emmanuel Macron's fuel taxes. By the afternoon, over 80,000 protesters caused disruption across the country. They blocked highways, allowing drivers to pass for free. Most protesters come from low-income households and are upset about President Macron's economic reforms, which they say favor the rich.
It's not just about fuel. I'm not just here because of the fuel. It's because of all of the taxes we have to pay. People can't take it anymore. Shoe keepers can't do it anymore. It needs to change. The government needs to change, and basically all of those in power.
Voters in Taiwan have backed referendums against same-sex marriage. More than 7 million people supported an item which said that marriage should only be recognized as between a man and a woman. In another referendum, conservative groups also voted against compulsory LGBTQ issues in school curriculum. Taiwan's top court legalized same-sex marriage in May 2017, and the government has ensured will implement it despite the outcome. But now LGBTQ activists fear the rights will be weakened. Syrian army troops have taken back control of the last southern holdout of the Islamic State. The Syrian troops forced out ISIL fighters from the Tulu Asafa desert region, which is about 300 kilometers southeast of the capital Damascus. Now ISIL has only 2 remaining holdings in the northeast of the country.
In the battle here, we saw that terrorists had access to a wide variety of ammunition and calibers, and they also had more sophisticated equipment like night vision goggles that slowed us down, in addition to us-made sniper scopes.
A South African court has ruled that the government will have to obtain full and formal consent from local communities before granting mining rights. This came as a result in a case where a local community group had taken the government and an Australian mining company to court to stop the development of a titanium mine on their land. Amnesty International said the judgment was a victory for marginalized communities across the world. Zambia's Supreme Court has sentenced a human rights activist to 6 years in prison for contempt of court after he accused the judiciary of corruption. The charges against Gregory Chiefire relate to an article he wrote questioning a court ruling in favor of 2 large South African corporations. Amnesty International denounced the case as a total fabrication and an affront to freedom of expression. Women have taken to the streets of Oxford in their underwear in show of solidarity with a rape victim. Here's some more on that and other stories from around the world.
Women dressed in their underwear have protested in Oxford after a rape victim was accused of provoking her attacker due to her choice of underwear. A defence lawyer in Ireland made the remarks, causing outrage, but the defendant was acquitted nonetheless. Women at the rally wanted to send a strong message that no form of clothing should be taken as sexual consent.
The whole attitude, perhaps, of courtrooms and specifically rape cases, there needs to be a massive change there. I understand, obviously, people need to be defended and they need to have their justice as well, but that can be done, I think, without holding up someone's underwear and implying that they consented when they just didn't.
A defiant Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, has said that his country won't beg European countries to lift economic sanctions. Speaking at a joint press conference with his Italian counterpart, he warned that the sanctions were entirely political, adding that Russia still has partners to develop projects with under the current conditions and that Italy is one of them.
We treat sanctions as a completely politicized decision. As in the case of Crimea, it punishes people for their free will. It's a serious violation of the Convention on Human Rights and other agreements on human rights. I think lawyers can prove it, having their texts on hand. On the other hand, we understand that sanctions are our reality. We are not the ones who started it all, and we will not beg our colleagues in Europe or wherever to lift them.
2 activists and critics of the Syrian government and armed rebels have been killed in Idlib province. According to reports, Raed Faras and Hamad Junaid were shot dead by a group riding in a van. Idlib is the last rebel stronghold made up of former Al-Qaeda fighters and pro-Turkish forces. The Islamic State also has a presence in the area. Targeted killings and kidnappings are on the rise.
French President Emmanuel Macron has agreed to return 26 cultural artifacts to Benin. The artifacts were taken by the French army during the colonial era. President Macron agreed to return 26 items, mostly royal statues, that were taken at the end of the 19th century. His decision was prompted by the findings of a study he commissioned on repatriating African cultural heritage held by French museums. There are around 90,000 African artworks held in museums across the world.
These are 26 artworks, out of an unknown number because there was never an inventory to determine the number of artworks that are on display in French museums, such as the Quai Branly. 26 may not be many, but it symbolizes a lot as the myth of repatriation is now broken.
We come to the end of this news brief. These and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurienglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.